If you like growing food, then you might like eating food. And if you like eating food, then you might like cooking food. Well, go check out the first season of Backyard Kitchen, available on Tubi for free. Available on all smart TVs and online. That's TUBI, all free, first season of Backyard Kitchen. Hello, gardeners. I hope you've been enjoying our sustainable gardening series, because today we're going to continue that conversation and we're going to talk all about composting. That's right. How is composting sustainable? Let's find out right here on the Backyard Gardens podcast.
To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Welcome to the Backyard Gardens podcast, where we talk about all things gardening. We are your hosts, Ben in Batavia, and you can find me gardening in the country.
And you'll find me gardening in the city. Get ready as we dig deep into this
wonderful world of gardening, where we learn to grow and grow for change. Okay, everybody, listen up. If you like our show, if you love, there's 3 things you can do to help us out. 1, you can become a patron and get 2 extra episodes a month. Or you could just do something as simple as sharing our podcast with people. Just put it in your social medias, whatever. And the other thing is, go check out YouTube. And please, if you want to watch us, we're there talking and we're giving tips and all kinds of stuff. So those are the 3 ways you can really help this show. Thank you. Okay, I felt like I was like a professor for some reason. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Please refer to your syllabus and
You know what? That's what we should do next year. We should make a whole syllabus and give it out.
No, we shouldn't.
And you know why we shouldn't? Because it would be wrecked after the first month in. It would be like, well, we're going to deviate from the syllabus class. So, but in all seriousness, composting sustainably. What is that about?
You tell me. It seems like you're the one that is a sustainable composter.
Well, if you've been listening to the podcast for any amount of time, Miss Batavia here doesn't compost.
Yeah, let's do some housekeeping. Yeah, I guess.
But hold on. But
go ahead, speak for me. That's
fine.
She's
very knowledgeable about composting. She's educated herself in it, so she's on the cusp. But there's ways that we can make it. There's reasons, why it's sustainable, and it took us a while to kind of come across it, though, I think, as we were talking about it a little bit beforehand. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the housekeeping item is I have continued year over year to study composting methods and things, and everything that I learn feeds into my ultimate fear. And I know for some it's going to sound juvenile, but this is my truth. I am deathly afraid of mice and rats. And I think someone said, if you don't have any kids, you aren't right. I've heard that saying before. Yeah. So if you don't have any mice or rats near your compost, I'm thinking maybe you aren't composting right. Now, in all seriousness, based on my property, I would love to have my own compost. I'm not sure if I would make enough, but every little bit helps. But because of what I think will be drawn in, I've just strayed away from it. Maybe it's one day in my garden future, but not today.
Yeah. And I don't see anything wrong with that. You have a legit concern. And first of all, we've discussed this before, but you do have a space to compost. But I know that we've talked at length about a raccoon lately. Mm-hmm. We've talked about cats and stuff like that. And, currently right now, I have a possum that will not leave my yard. He has found multiple food sources, and now we have to kind of get rid of them all. But one of them is always going to be the compost. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that is an ongoing issue. But all that aside, it is a way to make your garden more sustainable. Mm-hmm. So if you've been following along, or if you're new to it, we kind of break this down into multiple sections. So the first one's watering, and then it's pollinators or plant selections, fossil fuels, and then we'll give a general tip about it. Mm-hmm. So going in line with all of that, and I think the biggest one for this is actually watering. Well, as I say that, but as we go through the list, that may change.
Yeah, I was thinking about it, and we did in a mini-sode recently, ways to save money, and it's kind of what was it? free cycling. It's either about to come out or it just came out, the mini-sode on Tuesdays. And it's interesting because, I mean, compost is that. You know, it's all of that, you know. Even when you think about buying things potentially to feed that compost, your everyday, you know, food purchases could be in part feeding your compost. Not to mention when you're taking things out of your garden. I have used compost this is the 5th year that I've added compost to my garden spaces. Stumbled upon like, okay, yeah, this really would help. And that's probably the thing that I've added in the last 10 years that I've been consistent in. And that's compost, and ultimately bad compost. So there's still some bits of being sustainable. I want to claim that, you know, but not fully.
I think you're doing what you can. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And I think that's important. And that's, I mean, as we've gone through this whole series, we've said over and over and over that, you know, making a small change in your ways can lead to a bigger change abroad. So yeah, and I mean, adding compost, it does a lot of things to your garden. So if you're doing stuff like, especially if you have like a lot of clay as your soil or something, it just adds to it. It can do, and it's something that I get real hesitant of saying, is making it like a wonder drug. Like it can make it more, have more drainage. It can make it retain more water. It can keep it warm, keep it cool, but it can do all of these things and really benefit your garden. But depending on your compost, it definitely can help with water retention, right?
I thought you were going to go with, as a part of making compost, water is a real key, right? Watering your compost pile, right?
Well, yeah, I don't water my compost pile that much, but it does get some water. Like when it's really dry, I will water it. But yeah, it does use water for that. But I mean, that depends too, like how you have your compost set up. Like if you have your pile set up in the middle of a field where it gets nothing but sun, yeah, you're probably going to need to water it more. Like I strategically put mine under an overhang of some trees, you know, so as it gets the afternoon sun, which is hot, but then I put in a garden bed in front of it with the trellis. So when something's on the trellis, it stays in the shade a lot more, and that makes it a lot better.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
So composting, it uses... Sorry, I just got notified by Leonard that it was my recipe today. So, but adding in your compost, the act of making the compost too is sustainable in itself, right? Because we're not adding to the landfills and stuff like that. So,
or we're minimizing our additions to it, right? Right.
And so I would go as far to say, as far as water retention goes, and I think if you don't realize you're doing this, you are. If you're putting mulch into your garden, then you are composting. The act of mulching your garden composts.
Oh, so I love that. I've never really looked at it in that way.
Yeah. I mean, it breaks down, right? That's why we mulch. So as we put it in there and it starts to break down, not only is it suppressing the weeds, keeping the soil cooler, and leaving it more moist, but it's also composting and breaking down. So it's just adding to that.
Yeah, right before we started recording, I was out. That's why I asked for a little bit more time. I was out leafing my garden bed. I just made up that term. And I mean, not necessarily directly tied to our sustainable goals, but just generally speaking, when you talk about saving time for a gardener, you know, there's less weeds. I have a garden bed that basically now has not been covered, and I'm watching and I'm just like, those are weeds. That's not food. Those aren't volunteers. Those are weeds in there, you know? But here we are.
Yeah, it's, I mean, I have a flower bed right now and I can't tell what's what. So I'm having to wait for it to flower, whether it's weeds or not. I was just thinking about that the other day. I was going to call and tell you, but here we go. I'm going to call in. I was
probably outside reweeding a bed that I'd already weeded earlier in the spring. But It's all good.
So compost, when you take it and you squeeze it, it should kind of hold its form, right?
Yeah.
So the rest of my soil, when I do that, it doesn't do that. It just kind of crumbles. So that's why it's good to kind of mix it in there.
Yeah. That soil, do you feel like is just drier, or it doesn't have enough kind of living organisms in it?
No, I don't want to say it doesn't have enough living organisms. I think it's just, it's the function of stuff breaking down I don't know how to say it, humus. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
The humus material that breaks down is just more spongy. And that's why a lot of people don't recommend growing in 100% compost too. I've done it. It works, but you would wear yourself out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mentioned that I had replaced my wood chips. Speaking of, since mulching, we've claimed and we are championing that it's a part of composting. I replaced my wood chips, which was a pain in the ass, but a lot of the broken down wood chips, which I'm going to call soil, I moved to my flower beds very intentionally, not because I'm just not sure of that makeup, so very intentionally not growing vegetables in it. But I have kind of dirt piles all over the flower bed because over the years I've just it's almost like a filler. I toss some things in there, some extra material I have, and it's worked out pretty well. I think there are a bunch of different ways that, you can, through composting or the act of composting, fold things into your garden. And again, just be more sustainable, more kind to the environment. We're going to get a little frou-frou here.
I can give that to you.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah, I just had an idea about your compost situation too.
Okay.
So when we get into this later, no, it's actually not that bad. So we can get into it later, but just by making compost itself, because one thing that I do is when I make my garden, I always put a layer of soil in. But I'm not overly concerned about what that layer of soil is because I know over time I'm going to add compost in. I'm going to be mulching, which will compost as well. And then I'll add more. So every year I'm adding more and more compost to it. So that initial layer of soil isn't that big a deal to me because over time, and it can be, like this year I put in the wild garden, I put in some soil and it wasn't really the best soil. But I immediately went and I was like, okay, the soil's not good. Let me go. I had to buy a couple bags of compost because I ran out of my own. And I said, okay, you know what? It's no big deal. I put that compost in. It makes a difference. Things are growing. No issues. I put a layer of mulch down. The mulch will break down and add to it. And then I'll just put the compost on top of it. And then the leaves at the end of the year, put that on top of it. And it'll be, by next year, it's going to be a lot more, I would call it fluffy. That's what I would call it, more fluffy soil. That's
important, especially with some of the things we're growing. A lot of, kind of plants that will fruit or leafy greens, things that are going to grow and whatever it's producing is above the soil versus root vegetables. It's a lot easier to deal with, let's say, stiff soil. Not ideal, but you can manage through it. When it comes to things that are growing under the soil that you're harvesting, that fluffy soil is a dream come true. I have a couple of spots in my garden where, and I do pay a bit more attention to this now because I'm on the other side of receiving like the last bit of my soil drop from a couple of years ago was pretty crappy. And I can actually pinpoint where I put that, what beds I put that in and how those beds are performing. Right. So I do pay attention to that. And to your point, one of the methods that I've used is to add more compost to those beds. When I'm being diligent in fertilizing, fertilizing the plants that are going into that bed, because that, kind of that maybe poor soil needs a little bit more work. I'm just not in a place where, again, thinking about sustainable practices, I just don't want to dump that soil. I just don't want to get rid of that soil and then bring in something new. I feel like I can improve it.
Yeah. Do you, before we go to the break, do you find right now that since we've been doing this series that you kind of have been thinking more sustainably in your garden?
I think I have. I'm hoping that it it stays with me after we finish. But definitely, as we've been putting these episodes together, it has been much more top of mind when we're away from the microphone. So I mean, I think that's absolutely a positive, and that's what we're hoping when people listen to the series, that they take away from it in part as well.
We're force feeding you sustainability, and on that note, we'll be right back. We want everybody to have a garden, and we're going to give you a chance to win free seeds every month.
Head over to backyardgardenstv.com and enter your email address to be entered in all of our giveaways.
Good luck. I hope you're enjoying the show today. If you could do us a simple favor and share this show or any one of our other shows on your social media, it would help us greatly. All we want is to help people grow in their gardens, and this is the one thing that we can do to get more people exposed to gardening and help them be successful in their gardens. All right, so just to recap what just went down, compost is more water retentive, so it's going to hold more water, and we kind of went through all that. So this one is kind of difficult for me, but how about like for pollinators? Like do you think compost can help with pollinators?
Well, I mean, I think that, so if you go back to your soil, compost makes your soil more rich, right? It's a better growing space, then things will grow in that soil. I know this seems like very elementary, but things will then grow in that soil, and in turn, in things that pollinators want to come and visit your garden for will be present. I mean, I feel like that's pretty basic. I think things like if you go down the road of maybe if you consider birds as pollinators, right? Maybe, or minimally birds as, helpers in the garden, rich soil, worms, things of that nature feed in from a positive perspective for birds. And in turn,
I think the biggest thing is, so first of all, I agree with you, but I think the biggest benefit is compost just makes healthier plants. So healthier plants will make more and grow bigger, right?
Well, yeah,
so
thank you for
blooms.
helping me stumble through that. Yeah, that's what I meant, what he said.
I know, it is what you meant. I just wanted to clarify.
That's what she
a little
said.
Bit. Yeah. Ooh, there it is. But, I mean, do you remember 2 years ago that my garden just kind of really struggled? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I had a hard time. And if you're new to the show, and if you're not, then welcome. But I'll go over it real quick. I had 1 year, my garden just didn't really do that well. It just seemed like everything was struggling. Mm-hmm. And so over the winter, one of my goals was like, I'm going to improve the soil in my garden. And I went and I got a load of compost, and I put like 2 inches of compost on top. I mulched, where I put leaves on top, then I put the compost on top, and then on top of that, I mulched. And the next year, boom, I had one of the best gardens I've ever had. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so this past year, I not only did I put compost in, but I put the compost that I made all year in, and I used every single bit of it. I put it in everything. So it seems to me right now that things are going in the right direction. I've remulched and everything. So that to me told me the power of compost. Like at that point, I was like sold. Go ahead.
No, you can finish your thought.
I was going to say the whole thing about stronger plants really comes out in that story in my mind. Mm-hmm, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if you think about some of the small scale gardening we're doing, and this is, larger farms, larger gardens went into this as well, but some of the methods we use, we're really taxing the space we're growing in, right? And so throughout, the history of this podcast, we've talked about amending your garden beds and methods and things you can use. And obviously compost is one of those things you can use to amend your garden beds. But when you talk about, pollinators, visiting your space, there's a song I was going to sing, but I'm going to refrain myself. When you talk about pollinators visiting your space, compost brings all the pollinators to the yard. I couldn't help myself. I'm sorry. The idea is that you, again, to your point, want healthy plants, healthy healthy plants that are going to grow big, a part of what you're doing by amending that soil, adding that compost, you're contributing to keeping this growing area healthy, and you're contributing to keeping kind of this ecosystem you've created active, versus it potentially going dormant. And I think that that's a responsibility of ours, as we continue to kind of take from, and I'm going there, take from the earth. Like, it's a responsibility of ours to do what we can. Like, that's a big part of what we're talking about when it comes to sustainable gardening. And so I definitely, as I think about it more, I definitely see pollinators benefiting from the act of composting in a statement, in a sentence.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one thing we haven't even talked about at all, is all the microbes and micro life that's in there. And you're exactly right, Batavia. You're starting an ecosystem basically in this contained area. Even if you buy a bag of compost, you still are adding to it, because when you get it, it's charged, it's ready to go. It just has to get that air back to it and get moving and get stuff growing through it. And you said something about earthworms earlier, and they definitely help add to it as well. I mean, everybody knows earthworm castings and all that stuff, but I mean, do you want to buy earthworms or earthworm casting, or would you rather just have it as,
I have purchased
occurring
earthworm castings, and I know people will recommend, and I've just got off my butt to do it, like, using kind of as a first step into composting myself, creating earthworm castings through the act of, again, composting. And I generally think about, like, you're adding things to your garden that aren't naturally there. But from a composting perspective, I can see that being effective. Again, I love this concept of, it's just a little bit. It's just a little bit that you're doing, right? Unless it's harming, which a lot of what we've talked about isn't, the little bit, let's look at it as being helpful. As long as we're not creating this environment where it's like, oh, this is going to solve all of our problems, I'm going to add some worm castings to my, my garden. It's going to be worm castings plus,
Right. But that's the thing, is you don't have to buy them. So actually, I just saw a news article. Did you see this, where earthworms are invasive and taking over the forests of the United States?
Grief. No, I didn't.
Yeah. So that's what one agency says, one company says. It says invasive earthworms are taking over. Another one says earthworms are invasive. Did you know? And then the U.S. Forest Service says invasive Asian jumping worms are wreaking havoc. So it's a type of worm that's causing the issue, right? Mm-hmm. So here's the question, and this poses an issue. If we, a lot of people like to buy worms and then add them to their compost pile, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Now, who says that we're not buying the invasive worm and we just don't know it? Because, I mean, let's be honest. How many of us know how to identify a worm to its species?
What is it? Red wiggler or something that's generally used for creating the castings. I don't know, dude. I just,
But hold on. Let's keep going. So, are we contributing to this problem, right?
I mean,
because
it's possible. Yeah, I mean, it's possible when we are bringing, again, things that aren't naturally existing in our environment. When we're bringing things in, yeah, it's possible. Separate and apart, and off on a tangent, in Illinois in particular, where I live, our extension service posted some things regarding bird flu. And, for the garden in particular, it's like remove your bird feeders. There's certain kinds they were fine with, keep an eye out for sick pests, or sick animals, specifically sick birds, chickens, things of that nature. And also, the thing that caught my eye clearly was, all right, take the water out of your bird bath. I'm just like, no, I'm, giving my squirrels and the stray cats a drink of water. I can't do that. Still haven't seen a bird in there, but yeah. But I said that to say, you're bringing things that in some cases are inviting some items, some things, some people, some pests, some struggles to your garden. But now we're talking about like, you've heard the ordering lady beetles. Lady beetles, is that right? Ladybugs, thank you. Ordering ladybugs and bringing them into your garden to, perhaps deal with an aphid problem, yada, yada, yada. Like, if it's not naturally occurring, my thought is that it will not sustain itself.
Yeah. And so that's going to be related to one of the tips I'm going to give you when we get to the tip section, because there's stuff like that. You're exactly right. It just doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? So back to the pollinators, we kind of got off subject, which is not uncommon for us. Pollinators, I think it just makes a stronger plant, stronger flower. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, and probably maybe because we can get less fertilizer in our gardens too.
Maybe so.
You know what I mean?
Maybe so. And then, we have to sit down and talk about some episodes around not necessarily fertilizing, but added routines and steps and practices in our garden, and whether they really are beneficial, or are we just creating, kind of a honey-do list, a checklist of things to do, but not for today. I want to say this again, because I don't feel like it's come across. There are things that you're doing in your garden that directly benefit your garden. We've talked about as a part of this series, but then there are the things that you're doing in your garden that benefit the earth. Right. So the idea that even if it's an nth of a degree, that steps that you're taking, including composting, are creating these healthier plants, you're giving these pollinators something to eat.
Yeah.
And that alone has to be worth something to us. Right.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I would definitely imagine so. And, as we've gone through all of these, I really think that, plant selection, like, if you want to cover that real quick, stick your damn plants in compost. You know what I mean? Like, this kind of goes along as far as the categories for what we've kind of described these as. Mm-hmm. And I think pollinators and plant selection have always gone together throughout this series. So I can't think of anything that doesn't grow well in compost. Can you?
No.
With compost added.
No. And tell me what the difference is between hot compost, or is that fertilizer? Like, compost, is it compost that people are concerned about burning their plants? Remind me.
Yeah, some people are concerned about that, but it's fertilizer mostly. But I've definitely heard people say compost will burn your plants. And I think that is a literal saying, instead of, like, how fertilizer will burn your plants because it's too strong. If you put hot compost on your plants, it will literally burn your plants. So it's a different kind of burn. And yeah, people do think the same aspect as fertilizer burn. I think there's some people that subscribe to that. I personally don't. I've grown full-blown. I had that butternut squash that year that grew right out of the compost pile.
Yeah. And
it was the healthiest thing ever. And it was pure hot compost. So there's that.
Yeah, it's something about people that when people say things, and a lot of us do it, say it as a fact, and it's just, maybe you shouldn't, is really what they should be saying. Some people have bad experiences when they do. Urban legends, that's how they're born. Now everyone needs to go ahead and plant butternut squash seeds in their compost package. In their compost pile. Sorry. I got a lot of hearts here and it's distracting.
And then finally, well, not finally, but next is the fossil fuels. And I think this is a big one. The more that we've talked through it, I think, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but I think making your own compost is the sustainable part of fossil fuels. But I think even if you don't make your own compost, you're still part of the solution.
Yeah, I firmly agree with you. I've already said my piece. I've covered it off. I don't feel the need to apologize for where I am.
No.
And it doesn't take from the value I see in it, right? So I think that everything I've been looking around, and I have a couple of bags of purchased garden soil. So, you start with the garden soil that was in my one little space, back in 2008, and then over the years, I just buy a couple of bags. And then as I expanded, I started buying more and more and more bags. Then we had the front yard garden. I ended up having the soil drop, but I've still purchased bags of soil because I top off some of my garden spaces.
Right.
And so I've been looking around and really trying to think about ways to minimize repeated expenses. Right. And so I have a few bags of soil that I bought last year, I guess. I don't even think that the company, the place I bought it from carries that brand. But now I'm looking in and saying, I wonder if I can get away with not adding any of that soil to my garden, right? You know, so if you think about going back to clearly the subject, compost, it's a way to add, you know, I'm going to say soil for lack of a better term. It's a way to fill out your beds as well. Obviously, there's all of the additives that you're adding to it. But not only do you not have to drive somewhere to buy compost, you know, potentially you can minimize the amount of soil that you're adding to those spaces, right? True soil that you're adding to those spaces. And that could be anywhere from you driving somewhere, you having it delivered. Like all of those things matter, right?
Or the trucks bringing the bags of it to the store, the bags being made and shipped over here and all that stuff.
Every compost I've ever seen comes in plastic when you're buying it. Mm-hmm.
I guess it wouldn't work well if it came in a paper bag. I mean, but I mean, and seriously though, when you start to break stuff down like that, like how much fossil fuels does it take for me to get this shirt? It's scary to think that like that's it. You know, this shirt I'm sure it was made in like Vietnam or something. Like, thank you to the people in Vietnam that made my shirt. I do thoroughly enjoy it, but it had to come from ship all the way from there to, I'm assuming, California, and then get on a plane or a truck and go to the you know, all these different places so it could end up on my back. Yeah. Like, that's crazy to think about. And so when we're making our own compost, we're eliminating all of that. So that's one thing. The other thing is when we're making compost, so let's just call it what it is. Compost is usually kitchen scraps, garden scraps, leaf litter, stuff like that. You know, when I say leaf litter, like fallen leaves, maybe some manure if you're using, you know, if you have access to it, stuff like that. So all the kitchen scraps are not going into the landfill, right? So you're letting out less trash. So there's less trucks coming to get it. You're not and then, because if you put it in a landfill, it doesn't break down it'll break down in a plastic bag. What good's that doing you? You know, what good's that doing us? You know what I mean? And so same thing, like I don't know what I would do with my trimmings and stuff for my plants if I didn't compost.
Now, again, thinking very small and small expenses, right? So all of the things that I pull out of my garden, none of them are going anywhere besides in one of those brown recycle kind of lawn care bags, right? And it's my hope that they're doing the right thing when they pick them up. But those bags are like $3 for 5, you know, just hard cost, right? Yeah. You know, so, and I go through them all the time because, again, I feel like the right thing to do is put them in those bags versus in a regular plastic bag and put it in the regular garbage can. But I mean, if I had to guess, which I'm terrible at guessing, maybe $30 a year easily that I spend on those between the, you know, top of the year, the garden season, and then as we go through the season a bit, but then mostly at the end of the season when I'm doing cleanup, you know, so.
How much did you say you broke up?
I'm sorry. I think you all heard me clearly, right? Let's make him guess. I know.
30.
What did you say?
$30.
Yeah. Okay. Good job.
Okay. So, all right. I was going to wait for my tip, but I got an idea for you. So, I was out working in the garden today and I had a bunch of trimmings. And how many bags of leaves do you have right now?
Yeah, maybe $30 is high because that'd be like 30 bags or something. But anyway, so probably 6 or 7.
7 bags. So why don't you make a compost pile that has no food in it whatsoever? You just use leaves and you set the leaves aside and you add them sometimes, and then you just put in your trimmings from your garden. And there is no food. There's no reason for an animal to get into them.
I'll think about it.
How does that make you feel?
It makes me feel okay.
It makes you feel a little bit better?
Yeah, I mean, it makes me feel a little bit better, but it also makes me think about, carving out one more space in a small space, kind of small footprint space that I have. I do under my front porch, and I am scary. All right. I tried to pretend like I wasn't earlier in the episode, but I am. And so when I dug up the front yard, all of the grass I pulled up. Again, you don't have to, but I did at that time in 2019. And I stuffed it all underneath the porch, the front porch. And I can see through the lattice, it's not completely broken down. That would have been 4 summers ago. But I think to myself, to your point, what if I just start tossing some leaves in there as well? It's not breaking down, as quickly because there's really not a lot of sun, not a lot of water, some water, but not a lot. But I mean, there may be something there. I'll think
it's
about
not
it.
breaking down quickly because it's cold composting.
Okay, go ahead and give a term to the thing I'm doing. Sure.
So, well, you're using a method like you can hot compost, which is where you go out and you turn it all the time, or you can cold compost where you just go put it on top of the other, put it on top, put it on top.
Wait.
The difference is hot composting, you'll get compost in a couple months, and cold composting will be a couple years. But that's okay, because all that means is that once your pile gets big enough and you're cold composting, and let's say you don't even care if you're using compost, you're just composting because it's the right thing to do, then when it comes time, you can just flip that pile, pull the stuff right off of it, and you got nice compost that you didn't do anything but pile on. And that's a technique that can be used. And I did it for a long time. Now I'm actively more because I was like, look, I need my compost faster.
Yeah.
And I'm also putting chicken manure in it. So there's that. And so that's another thing too. If you have chickens or anything, or if you're thinking about it, taking the manure from the chickens and composting it, like what else am I going to do with the manure? I have a friend and she has chickens, but she doesn't compost. And so she bags up the manure and gives it away. And I'm like, you're literally giving away gold. Like I've told her, like, please start making compost. Please, I beg you.
Does she have a garden?
So, yeah, she's got a garden. But she just doesn't. I think it's the same as you. She's just running out of room in her yard. And I'm like, but you've got this opportunity. You've got this. So
but
it's tough.
Let me tap on that. So I was talking to a neighbor today, and there is between her fence and the cage baby, we've had kind of a tree weed that grows as long as I've lived here. It's been a good while. And we've done all kinds of things to cut it off, and, the roots are still underneath. So it's going to find other ways to peek out and grow. And so it's very difficult with the cage baby for me to get to it on my side. So, I asked her, let me walk around so I can try to get inside of the fence to cut it. And, you look and you say, oh, well, what harm is it going to do? And there are a couple of issues with it. But there's this thing of I just don't like the aesthetic, right? It ultimately, if I let things grow, it's going to end up shading out the things I'm growing. But I also don't like the aesthetic. That's not a part of my garden design, this weird tree that's growing in between our two yards. But if I look at I can manage, this cold compost, or for her, she can add a compost bin or something on her property. At some point, you have to teeter on what's the most responsible decision and perhaps make a sacrifice. So when I talk about, that's one more space I have to, identify, I technically have enough garden beds and garden space. I could figure it out if it was that important to me. And again, listen, we're transparent here. It's easy to lean on my fear and say, not my cup of tea. And now I don't even think about giving up any garden beds, Yeah.
And I mean, it's just, so that was an idea that I had for you, because I don't know of any animal, mammal, that would come and just be like, ooh, these tomato stems smell good. Let me get a bite, I guess it could happen. I don't know. So that's an option. And and I know that there are listeners that have the same concerns as you, because we've had comments and messages about them. So, and I respect that, because even though I'm not scared of the possum, and I like having him around because he does do good things, he's still freaky.
What does he do good? Because I have one that visits as well. At this point, there are
they eat rats and mice.
4 things. The stray cats, which have been here forever, and I've always accepted them. Although they straight come to my door. They're just chilling on my back porch, and I'm not one to feed. anything, right? So the stray cats, the squirrels, which was my original pest, but hey, I'm chilling with them, right? I've over the years seen opossums more frequently now, and then more recently the family, and then singular raccoons. And I keep on trying to push back in my head, like, what are you expecting based on what you're doing in your space, Yeah. But I don't want to admit that to myself. And so far, the biggest damage that I've seen, beyond scooping up some poop from, primarily the cats, the biggest damage I've seen was this year, and it's raccoons digging in like soil. In some cases, soil that had things in it from last year that I forgot about, but in other cases, like a clear, just nothing but soil in a bed. So help me understand how they can help me.
So
what's
raccoons are
sustainable
just
to do when it comes to these things?
Raccoons are a pest, and they come around because there's food. But possums, I guess raccoons eat the same thing. I don't know, but possums are known to eat mice and rats and moles and all kinds of stuff. I like the cats, Now somebody around you is probably feeding the cats.
I did learn that recently, and I'm trying to. Well, actually, she's moving, so that's fine.
Right. So somebody around you is feeding the cats, which is why they come around, and that's probably why you have your raccoons and your possums, and you probably, for your raccoons and possums, part of that because you've created, like you said, an ecosystem. You've literally put out a buffet.
Yep.
And said, hey, come on. But I will say this, I've never had anything really like shimmy up my tomato plants and eat my tomatoes and stuff like that. And I do have a pile of raccoons that live on my property. So there is that. But I think that, anywhere there's cat food, you're going to get all three of those every single time.
Anywhere there's what kind of food?
Cat food.
Okay.
Yeah, they all eat that stuff. So we found out that our neighbor across the street was giving cat food out, and we saw our cat over there eating. I was like, well, hell no, my cat's already got a weight issue, so But then it was like, dude, we have foxes, coyotes, possums, raccoons, like all these things. Like, you're just making it worse. Like, I don't have a problem with them being here, but don't bring them to the front door.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Let them stay in the woods where they want to be. But back to the fossil fuel, the other thing is eliminating the amount of fertilizer that you're using too. Or not eliminating, but cutting down drastically, and possibly even eliminating, because, correct me if I'm wrong, for a long time you didn't fertilize at all.
No, I 10 years easy, I didn't fertilize, not one single time. Didn't even think it was necessary. I saw a reel on Instagram where someone was like, oh, so you don't fertilize your plants, house plants. And they're like, oh, okay. It was like a voiceover. And I'm like, yep, that's me. I'm her, And a part of it was the continued beating of the drum, like, this is what's best for your plants. A part of it, just to be frank, probably is the influence of this podcast. At some point, my thought is that things run their course. And so if I was growing the same exact things, meaning the same quantity over these years, I probably would be fine, right? But because the quantity has increased drastically, I am trying to be considerate, especially with my expectations increasing as well. I'm actually doing potato fertilizer this year, which I've never done in these years of growing potatoes. I'm just uber curious if it's going to be the thing that makes the difference. Maybe I think the soil is healthy and, it's doing just fine for these potatoes, but maybe it does need a boost. But that goes back to the other set of episodes. Like, I don't want to add to, hey, that's the bell for the swear word. I don't want to add shit that I have to keep up with every year if I don't have to add that shit.
Yeah.
Like, quite literally.
So I buy a 20-pound bag. I think it's a 20-pound bag of fertilizer for the year, and when it's out, it's out. So that's what I do. But you're cutting down the deliveries and all that stuff, and then also the labor that you have to add to it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And you can make things like compost tea and stuff where you soak your compost and extract everything from it and drain it and strain it and pour it and water with it. You can do all that. I don't use I did not use a potato fertilizer this year. My potatoes are looking great.
Oh, awesome.
I'm going to be putting those on a reel soon.
Have you gotten any new potatoes out yet?
No, I haven't. What do you mean new potatoes out?
The young potatoes, before they get to their
Oh, no.
most
I'm not
mature
touching
size.
them until it's time to get them.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a little worried because I'm not adding soil. So I'm just like, do your thing. I'm mulched heavy. Do your thing. I'm blowing it kisses every day, Like, come on, baby. You keep growing.
Yay.
But no, what I was going to say is as as we fertilize and stuff, you're putting a little bit more stress onto the ground as well. And so the way I look at it is, well, first of all, this podcast doesn't care if you use organic or synthetic fertilizer. That's up to you as a gardener. So there's that.
Agreed.
But when you use a fertilizer, if you have compost, if you have bad soil, the number one thing you can do is add compost to your soil. That's the number one thing you can do to start to correct it is add compost because it's pH balanced. It's generally got, as long as you've done your ratios semi-right, as long as it's not like a slurry, soupy mush, you're going to start to correct your soil. And that's so amazing about it. So you're not only cutting down on fertilizer, but you're cutting down on lime. You're cutting down on potassium, all these different things that we're buying and putting in. So
you know what? Come on, somebody. You're speaking my language now, boy. I'm still not going to add compost to my garden.
So here we go. Before we get to the tips, if you compost, you're saving money, you're saving the planet, and you're making your job easier for yourself in the long run. And it makes your soil more sustainable over time because you're less dependent on these extra additives.
You're basically a superhero.
Basically, compost is the superhero.
Oh, no, I meant the individual that's taking these steps.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, if I had a soil issue, which I do, the first thing I did is I went and bought a bag of compost and threw it in because I didn't have any made. First thing I did. Didn't even think twice about it. So there's that. Now,
good on you.
You got a tip?
No, I don't have a tip.
You don't have any tips about compost?
Face your fears. I'm not, but you should face your fears.
Nah, come on now. Well, we gave Miss Batavia we gave her something to think about, so we'll do that.
I did write it down, and I wrote all kinds of squiggly lines around it, and that's, my doodles in that instance are important. They mean something.
Yeah, there we go. So when we were talking about earthworms, one thing that I was going to tell you guys is don't add earthworms to your compost because it's stupid. If they don't want to be there, they're going to leave. That's just all there is to it. So you can add earthworms, but if it's an open bin, like an open sitting on the ground, they're just going to leave and go down into the ground and go somewhere else. So do yourself a favor. I've never bought earthworms and put it in my compost. And when I flip my pile, it's filled with worms. Yeah. So, and not only is it filled with worms, I also have this big pot that I do, and I take it out and I put it in the pot to cool it. So I'll just let it sit there for a month or so. When I come back to it, worms have come up through the bottom of the pot into the compost. Because remember this, number one thing about compost people say is, there's no worms in my compost. Oh no, they're all at the bottom. I need to flip it to get them to the top. You were wrong. They're down in the bottom because it's too hot at the top, and we need to be pulling our compost from the bottom. So there it is. Okay. I've seen a couple people upset because all the worms are at the bottom, and that's where they're supposed to be.
Yeah. All right. So my tip is it's okay to start small. And I think, primarily like 90+% of this episode in this series is about you creating your own compost. So this is what that episode is centered on. But just because if you're not creating it and if you don't have plans on creating it, doesn't mean that you shouldn't add it to your garden, right? So if you plan on making purchases, that's a great one to make. If you would like to compost, I believe it's absolutely okay to start small. You don't have to look at everything as do it for your entire garden space. So if you're making compost on your own, chances are out of the gate, you're not going to be able to make enough to cover off on your entire garden, however big or small it is, right? But just focus on something like, I'm going to argue containers. That's the first place I'm going to add compost to. Versus if I have to make a choice versus my raised beds or my in-ground beds. So that's what I got.
Yeah, and so I'll build onto that. If you are adding compost to your garden, you don't have to put 5 inches of compost on top of your garden every year. You can put a half an inch to 2 inches somewhere in there. So if you don't have a lot, you haven't made a lot, you can spread it out, or you can go crazy on one and buy bags for the other and just note to self, I need to make more compost because it's a learning process.
Yeah.
I don't like the fact that I ran out of compost completely, but now I know, like, hey, I need to be a little bit more diligent and I need to make sure that I'm making it a little bit faster. And to speed it up, all I do is I turn it more often and feed it more. So instead of, emptying the chicken coop out once a month, maybe I should do it twice a month or once a week and just get more of that litter and stuff out of there to add to it, because that's a big component of my compost system.
Do you have an idea of like how much compost you and your family are producing, like volume wise?
I can, if you give me a minute, I can tell you.
Okay. Do you want to go to the break before the recipe of the day and come back and tell us?
Yeah, let's do that. Let me, I'm going to give you guys the recipe and then I'll give you that number of how much compost I'm making as of last year. So we'll be right back with the recipe of the day.
Ben, what question do we get asked the most?
I would have to say it's probably more something like, what are the products we use in our gardens the most?
Ding, 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 ding. That's the correct answer. Hey, there's an Amazon link below.
When you get over to the Amazon store, know that you're going to be supporting the podcast, but all of the products both Batavia and I have used in our gardens. We want to see you all over on YouTube, so check us out at Backyard Gardens TV to watch our podcasts and other gardening videos. Batavia must have a banger. She's trying to steal my recipe, but I got one for y'all. So
I'm so hungry right now, so I'm thinking about all kinds of food. But go ahead, let's hear what you have, and I'm gonna make that.
So this is going to use 4 ingredients from your garden. Yeah, 4. If you're lucky and you have ripe tomatoes right now, then good. And if you don't, you might have to buy one. But I'm going to tell you a guacamole recipe. This is a family recipe. So it's 2. I got to pull off the top of my head. 2 avocados, 3 plum tomatoes. So that would be like a Roma or something like that. Why did I give Roma? Because that's usually what I grow. 4 scallions, 3 cloves of garlic, salt, pepper, and then as much lime juice as you want. And then the final ingredient would be a little bit of cilantro. So you mash it up, you cut it up, and you mix it together, and you let it sit for a while. If you have to make it the night before you go somewhere, you can take the pit of the avocado and put it into the guacamole, and it will keep it from browning if you cover it. So anytime you don't want your avocado to turn brown, that's what you can do, is keep the pit near it and covered, and it'll not let it do that. The ingredients that I take from my garden would be the tomatoes, the garlic, the scallions, and the cilantro. So that's 4. If you can grow limes, then I don't want to talk to you because I'm super jealous, because that means you can grow a whole slew of things I can't. But yeah, it's super easy. Just mash it and mix it up and grub on it.
Similar to peanut butter, guacamole is one of those things where I just say every time I have it, why don't I eat more of you? Well done. Because
if I ate as much as I wanted, I'd be as big as this house.
Well, listen, if I'm going to carry this weight, I want it to be focused and caused by really, really, really good things.
I'll give it to you. All right. I told you guys that I was going to give you the amount of compost we made last year. So last year we made 63 cubic feet of compost roughly. And so this year, my goal is to make 94.5 cubic feet. So what that ends up being is Last year it was 2 bins, 3 feet high or 3 feet wide, 3 feet across, 3.5 feet deep. And there was 2 of those. And so we made that, but where we made the mistake is we split it up over the year. Mm-hmm. And what I really need to do is like right now, and this is what I'm doing, is I'm just letting it cook, and I'm adding to one pile, and then I'll just keep adding. So my goal is about hopefully July is to pull out what's in one bin, that's my finished bin, mm-hmm. and then put my unfinished bin back into that, and then put that on top and let that cook down until probably about September. And then I'll probably do the same again with what I have, and then also add to it at the same time. And then that should help me to make more compost for the year. So if I take that same amount and then I multiply that by 1.5, then we should be good. So just make as much compost as you can, be sustainable. So we've lost internet connection and Batavia kind of disappeared. So we're going to go ahead and end this one. Thank you guys so much for being part of the show. Keep it real. And if you want to do those 3 things to help us out, you can. Either one of them. You can become a patron, you can share the show, or you can subscribe to YouTube and watch some of our videos. And everybody be safe. Go do some composting. And we're going to come back next time and talk about how we are going to make our gardens more sustainable after having this conversation. So until next time, we'll talk to you guys later.
2 things. Ben disappeared. I didn't. And see ya.
She's back. We hope you enjoyed today's show. Please follow us on YouTube at Backyard Gardens TV.
Instagram at Backyard Gardens TV. Over on our website, backyardgardenstv.com. And then we have Patreon at Backyard Gardens.
And don't forget to check out our links below to help the show. Thank you so much for joining us as we learn to grow and grow for change. Cut.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Hey everybody, thanks for checking out the Backyard Gardens podcast.
If you like what we're doing and you want to continue to support the podcast, head over to our Patreon page to sign up.
You can also make a one-time donation using PayPal. Both of these links are in the description.
With your support, we can continue growing and helping others in their gardens. See ya!
If you guys want some Backyard Gardens gear,
go to the link below and check out our t-shirts, mugs, pint glasses, and other gear.
All purchases go towards helping to support the show, so thank you so much in advance, and we hope you enjoy. We want everybody to have a garden, and we're going to give you a chance to win free seeds every month.
Head over to backyardgardenstv.com and enter your email address to be entered in all of our giveaways.
Good luck!
We want you to be a part of our gardening community. DM us a picture of your garden at Backyard Gardens TV on Instagram, and we will share it with our listeners.